Well, the controversy continues 900 years
It
later, doesn't
does, yeah. I mean, that's so interesting,
it?
right? And of course, as you know, in Japan, the sort of what you say tension is still very much there. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I studied in Japan at Komazawa University, which is
Hmm.
affiliated with the Soto school. And sometimes we were at conferences and people from Hanasono College in Kyoto would come. And of course, that's affiliated with the Rinzai school. And they were
Right.
very polite and nice to each other. It's not that at all, right? But they were very aware that they had different backgrounds, right? And that they came from different traditions. And yeah. But in China, that distinction has really more or less disappeared. And so in China, it's usually understood that, well, you can do koan meditation, or you can do this sort of like just meditating without a koan. They don't actually call it silent illumination now, but either one is fine. They're sort of very like, yeah. So in China, that sort of distinction has more or less disappeared. Where in Japan, of course, it's continued strong.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a couple of things I'd like to ask you about Dahui. One is you started to mention how uh, some of his foremost descendants, students, were women, and it was pretty radical at the time. In fact, he went to a lecture. He was invited to go to a lecture by one of Hong's brothers, right? And he kind of stole away one of his students, who was a woman
Mhm.
and quite brilliant in her own right, evidently. Do you have any stories on that?
I don't have a lot, but it to me it's actually very interesting. But somehow I feel that women scholars probably should dive into this more than a guy like me. But it is very interesting that as I think I mentioned earlier, that China is the one tradition, one Buddhist tradition where they have kept up a full ordination of nuns, and so
Mm,
that means that nuns and monks, when they're fully ordained, are really equal, right? And um, almost everywhere else, either nuns cannot get the full ordination or they can't be ordained at all, like in Theravada countries today, right? And so there was a lot. I mean, women could achieve this status as quite high as a fully ordained monastic. And women were participating in the Chan tradition as well. Now, one of the people who studied this some is Mary Levering, who wrote an interesting article on quite a few years ago on one of Dahui's students. Um, and I'm sort of, I didn't pull it out in preparation for this, so I don't remember
yeah,
exactly.
no, that's
But one
fine.
of the things he's pointing out is that it seems that as a woman, you could receive the transmission. So you could get a transmission on a sort of equal level as men, but you couldn't pass it on.
Mm, mm,
So women could receive the transmission and sort of everything that carries with it, right? But they were not able to give it on to their own students.
mm, mm,
And that's sort of what the conclusion that she came up
mm,
with.
mm.
Now, whether that's always true in all cases, I don't know. I don't think anyone has really dug into it enough that we can
Mhm.
know for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
the women and the lay people were at the bottom of the list, weren't they? The
yeah,
transmission
exactly.
list.
When you have a list of, I mean, of course, lay people were. I mean, usually, if you look at this, I mean, we're so lucky to have all this really fascinating material associated with Dahui, right, and Hongdu
Mm,
too. But so Dahui, we have this sort of biography that goes year by year, and it ends with this list of his disciples. But it sort of clearly puts them in slightly different categories, right? So like kind of fully enlightened disciples, and then disciples who's seen something or whatever, and then the lay people and the nuns, right, usually at the bottom of the list. So of
yeah.
course lay people were not expected to, so even if lay people got some sort of transmission, they were in general not considered equal to a monastic who had a
Hmm.
full
Hmm.
transmission from
Hmm.
their master.
Hmm. Hmm.
And as a lay person, you could not pass it on to someone else either.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.